based model. It's an input-based model, right? So the client, instead of variabilizing it in the input costs, they're actually variabilizing their costs based on the output. That is what industrialized service is all about. So you can literally pick and choose. The third aspect is the pricing. This allows us to charge a premium to our clients. How does it do? How can we do that? Because of the high level of standardization and predictability, we don't have to struggle to meet deadlines or timelines. I may be talking about vision here, but we have realized that vision to some extent, if not completely. So, for instance, you can actually charge a premium for a certain service that you feel, something there where the client wants a fast turnaround time. Actually, we can do that, or something which is strategic nature to the client. Finally, all this comes at an accountability, more accountability. So, from the client saying who, what, when, and how, they're only saying what and when, and we have to determine the rest of it, or pay the price for it, right? So we do depend a lot on the processes. Now, why we are moving up also is because there is decreasing amount of patience thanks to the promises made by technologies like cloud, maybe the tools evolving ALM, and so on. There is a decreasing amount of patience. There is a continued pressure on reducing costs. So we can't wish away all those things, right? And one more point is that I want to say that let us also admit the fact that there is a certain set of services which are getting commoditized today, right? We really started off with BPO, then moved on to infrastructure, testing, probably application management, and so on. So we cannot wish away that fact, and maybe lends itself to more automation. So this is the definition that we have at Wipro come up with of what the factory model is. A delivery model that enables work with similar characteristics to be accomplished in a consistent and predictable manner through well-defined processes, tools, interfaces, and a team that is flexible, scalable, and empowered. So the operative words are consistent and predictable, right? Work with similar characteristics. So we are looking for a repetitive pattern, and that is the key, right? And when we're talking about a team that is scalable, so there is going to be a core team, then there is a flexible team, what we're talking about here, in the sense which can be added or released from a particular activity or a particular engagement. And empowered so that decision making happens faster. So here are some of the key attributes. I think one very important attribute is what it is really taken from service industry. The services have to be predefined. We are actually moving to a state where we should have a service catalog defined for IT services. For instance, let's say data management, and then the data management service can be segmented further. You can say I do data migration, I do data cleansing, I do ETL, probably analytics. So that has to be well defined. So that requires disciplined thinking. What happens today is a huge temptation to go beyond what is defined in that business unit or ODC, and so that you really don't know what one stands for against the other. I think this is the first and most important factor for a factory to be successful. It is about disciplined thinking and resisting the temptation of higher revenues and variety. The second aspect is standardization. So we're not just talking about task standardization, we're talking about standardization in all aspects. Trainings that we do, the tools that we use, the orientation program for the people. So everything has to be standardized to the extent possible. SOPs have to be defined for every task that we do. Task and profile segregation, I think it's an overarching kind of a concept, where what we're saying is that the tasks are determined by the profile of the person, by the competency of the person, because that is what will lead eventually to higher productivity instead of too much of task switching that happens today. We will see a specific example there, how it really helps. So when we come to that. The second aspect is pooled expertise. So we saw the problem of locking in experts, So that is something that is extremely important, the availability of those experts across a spectrum of services that we do. so that you can maximize their full potential, you can increase their utilization, maximize possibly opportunities for revenues. Virtualization is a complete technology enablement of factory, I would say. Today, not only you can, so here, let's talk of infrastructure. I think infrastructure virtualization today is very much possible thanks to cloud. And we're also talking about a concept called desktop virtualization. What desktop virtualization does, it helps you to work for multiple, that's what we implemented at Wipro. It helps you to work across multiple clients using the same desktop. You simply switch the context in a completely secured manner. So it's possible to do, right? You can also look at other aspects of virtualization of services. Virtualization is becoming quite popular in testing area. You don't have to set up the test environment over and over again. So I think that's, again, a fairly popular form of virtualization. And then we're talking about well-defined interfaces, which a factory requires with other factories, with clients, and so on, for it to succeed. So this is the reference model, okay, what we defined at Wipro. Essentially what we're saying is these are all the ingredients of a factory. There are certain set of processes called core processes, and then there are what you see on the x-axis and the enabling processes which let the core processes function. Let me just take a few examples quickly. See, when we talk of demand management, that demand management is all about the processes which capture, validate, consolidate demand based on certain criteria. We see today fragmented demand all over the place. Then we have a problem of planned demand and unplanned demand. Planned demand is, of course, the work orders that come to you in a structured manner. Unplanned demand is all the rework that happens, right? And what it causes is a lot of burnout of people. So this is the very first step, really, we thought in the process definition that can we consolidate demand in one place. Capacity planning, how do you use your capacities in the most efficient manner to meet the demand. Work scheduling, with all the constraints, internal prioritization, not just external prioritization, you need to schedule the work when it's happening across projects, across clients. Work allocation, I think pretty important concept again. How do you ensure the right person is available at the right time for the right work? That is what successful work allocation is all about, right? Then workflow management, which could be looked at a series of interrelated work allocations till you get a finished product in place. And release management, of course, how we package it in the end. So on the left-hand side, whatever you see, these, as I said, enable the functions, so the process on the x-axis to function. For instance, what we would like to do is we don't want knowledge management, but knowledge, we had I think somebody mentioned it earlier, to sit in some repository separately. Knowledge must be built into the workflow. How many issues am I resolving with the help of KEDB? How do I have a structured and managed reviews happening? That is the challenge, not the fact that I have so many reusable artifacts sitting somewhere, right? Similarly, how do I ensure the quality? How do I ensure quality is built into the process, right? One of the ways of ensuring is that you capture quality or the metrics in real time, instead of capturing metrics later on once the process is done, because you leave a huge opportunity for manipulation, right? So the other aspect is how do we directly measure the product quality instead of just focusing on the product process quality? Can I use statistical sampling as it happens in the case of manufacturing industry? So some of those aspects are pretty important. The third aspect in quality would be how do I build the gating processes. Today, there are ALM tools that allow the gating to happen. You can define certain thresholds that until a review is done, I will not allow checking to happen. So that kind of stuff is possible today. And how much coverage is there in unit testing before actually go for a build? So here the message is that these are interrelated processes. Do not look at one process in itself. You have to look at the relationship, look at as one whole. I was actually involved in the assessment of many, I would say, flex, we call it flex in Wipro factories, centers, and one of the things I noticed is that many people do well on one or two aspects, or three aspects. Nobody looks at all the aspects, you know, and it won't get you there for sure. You know, 80% in three aspects will be much less than 30% in multiple aspects. Because people have individual preferences. They're motivated by some things they've done in the past. So all those issues are there. The execution happens in clusters. It could be a cell-based cluster or line-based cluster, and you have to think of multiple aspects when you're designing that. For example, in a cell, you would have you have to ensure that people are close to each other. How do I disallow the noise to sort of be impacting their work? So probably have to have higher partitions over there. It could be just the other way in a line-based kind of system where you actually want to see the visual display which is there. So there are different design aspects. Yes, so that's basically the overall thought about the core process and the enabling process. One more thing, HR management. I think that's extremely important. The thing I want to talk about here is that we have to look at really changing the GNOs from qualitative to quantitative. I think that's extremely important, and there should be a way of measuring it objectively, transparently. Instead of somebody writing an appraisal, the system should write the appraisal based on my productivity. That is for those processes which are commoditized. I think there is no other way but this. It is already happening in BPUI infrastructure services. We are seeing it. This is a sample org structure that we proposed internally. So what you see here, the 2-3 aspects I just want to bring in here is, you see different roles. Okay, some of the acronyms you will not sort of get. Like there's a demand fulfillment manager, you know. There is a planning and scheduling manager. These are not the typical roles that you would see in a traditional delivery structure. Okay, that is one aspect. The second thing we are talking about here is flatter hierarchies. The third aspect is flatter hierarchies so that there's less of delegation. Right? Third aspect is competency alignment. So what we're saying here is that there should be less and less compartmentalization, which is to say there should not be thick lines to bosses. It may be a controversial point I may be making. The problem is there will be a lot of time otherwise loyalty to the boss rather than to the work. And if I have competency leads which shifts, who are only aligning the work, who are only looking at the technical, providing the technical direction, chances are high I'll be focused on my job. Okay. Then we have to have well-defined interfaces with the customer team, pre-sales and so on. And that is a role what the service delivery managers do. So rest of the people are internal facing, a service delivery manager is external facing. Now we try to implement some of these concepts in the pro. And I must say that these are like done in isolation at this stage. They have not become mainstream yet. This is the example I was talking about on task and profile segregation. Now what you see here is, this is what we did. We did an exercise to look in the testing area. A large crowd, I guess, here is representing. You know what a typical tester task is, and what a typical test engineer task is, and a test lead. So what we saw is there were many overlapping tasks. We saw test leads actually doing manual testing simply because there was no tester available. So urgent things took precedence over important things. So idea is first, can you break down these activities? They're the first, right? And what do you think should be aligned to each role? So we did this, and this alignment happened. And after this, rationalization happened. What you see there. After looking at the percentage of time each was spending on various activities, the net result was 13% cost takeout without doing anything else. Higher employee morale, I would say, because certainly nobody wants to do a job that is lower than the profile or the expectation. So I think that really helped. I think that's the kind of stuff you need to bring in across. So that's a concept of task and profile segregation. So these are just quick examples of some factories in operation. So we have something called an EBAP factory, where we have defined RICEF is well-defined, sort of well-known objects in package implementation area, which is reports, interfaces, conversion, user exits, and so on, forms. So this define the scope, or define the goal of the factory. Then what you see here is, I mean, you see what's so strange or what's so different about it, define, design, develop. What is different is objects are being produced for, they're built to stock, they're not built to order. That is the difference. Okay? And once they're built to stock, then you are obviously cutting down the overall cycle time. You know, you're keeping people occupied. You could have a line which is going horizontally, as you see over there. You know, people in parallel working on these different objects at the same time, activities which are cutting across objects. You could probably have a mix and match of the structure. So what we eventually want to achieve here, what you see on the bottom right-hand corner, is possible economies of scope and economies of scale. The first one represents economies of scale, that I can produce the same reports, use the same report and across different projects. I can have a combination which can be used in one project and with some level of customization in another project. I have to say that it's not possible for all kinds of development. You have to identify which are the specific areas that lend themselves best to this kind of process. This is another one which is example which is about production support. I think it's a fairly mature area today, thanks to the maturity of ITIL processes. There we have fairly advanced and well-adopted ticketing systems. And again, we are talking of demand consolidation happening at one point. Then there's a shop floor where various lines are defined, you know. So you see level 1 activities are actually defined fully here, you know, whether it is patching, whether it's installation work and so on, and what will be in end products after that. You know, so the other aspect here is that you see more and more effort would go into engineering tasks so that you don't repeat the same thing, you don't reinvent the wheel, and you probably can define more and more usable components. You can enrich your knowledge base to solve some of those problems, and monitoring systems have to be in place, which can also generate tickets, you know. So that is something like applying a JIDO car, automation kind of concept over here. So we found this pretty successful in infrastructure area, and we have a global command center over there, which uses some of these concepts which cater to clients across the globe. Also, we have one in Mysore which cater to clients within the country. And we are also trying to apply it in application space. So that's all I think that I have. Thanks. Thank
Okay, good afternoon everyone. Okay, I got some response. Thanks a lot. I was not expecting that to be asked. Right. So, thanks for being a very patient and attentive audience. Actually, like I'm standing on a pretty good platform where I'm going to kind of like put the foundation in terms of like what a factory model is, right? And I represent a company which is like supposed to be pretty good in factory process, which is Dell, right? But I have no relevance to the group. I am part of a product group which does the software and hardware product design and development. Okay. So initially when somebody comes and talks to me about factory processes, I always used to tell, okay, that's for you, not for me. Right? So that's perfectly fine. Right? Like I appreciate it, like you're doing a pretty good job. Right? Like you're following what Toyota was following. I'm really appreciative of that. You guys have got a lot of patents. But we are very different. We are a knowledge group. We think differently. Right? Like we act differently. So I just don't want to follow any of those things, right? So this used to be my attitude, right? So I'll just be very honest with you, right? Like this is way back in 2008, I'm talking about Kaliraj, right? So I just went into IIM, where I did my executive general management program, where the different general management subjects were thrown at me, like where I started seeing a correlation between the different pieces that's coming up together, whether it is an operational excellence or it's the case studies of like your like Toyotas, how they reduce waste, or like all those things. And thanks to a lot of my professors who just broke my myth that like even IT industry can do that, right? So that's when I came back to Dell, I just started thinking that like, hey, probably we should be able to do something, right? So let me just, actually like, so I could have correlated a whole lot of things that we do in the IT to the factory model. That's a traditional manufacturing model. But I just picked up a particular theme so that I can drive home certain points that I have done successfully, that probably you'll be able to go back and implement it into your organization if you're not following it. If you're following it, I'm sorry about that, right? So that's going to be something like repetitive for you, right? So I'm not going to tell that, like I'm just going to talk about something unique that nobody has done. Some of these things are pretty common, right? So you might have already been doing that, so please follow the same, right? Like I just like to understand from you if you're doing something different, like I'll just like to interlock with you and just like learn from you, right? So let me just introduce this concept called waste, right? Waste is any activity that does not add value to the product or services. This is a pretty loaded statement, right? And there was one additional statement to this which I just purposefully, I just removed it actually, because that makes it like pretty simple for us to correlate to certain things and not to certain things. That is like, it was also reading it as, hey, waste is something like the customer is not ready to pay for. If I were to put that statement over here, it would have changed the whole grasp of this statement. I purposefully edited that and I just removed it. For a reason. Because the moment I bring in the customer and the money matter into this whole game, then my thought process is, oh, okay, that is an external facing, this is an internal facing, all I'm doing is internal, and customer no need to pay for it. But trust me, every single process that you are doing is increasing your product cost and it is eroding your margin. In this economic condition, your ultimate idea is to improve your bottom line. And every single group in the organization can contribute to the bottom line. If somebody feels that like testing as a group cannot contribute to the bottom line, I'm not talking about a testing services group, I'm talking about a product environment where you are a test manager, you can contribute to the bottom line of the organization. This is my strong belief, and we have been successfully doing it. Today, some of my managers are getting measured based on this. Right? So let me come back to the waste as a concept. If you really see, there are very interesting things, right? One is the overproduction. This is, I'm talking from a very manufacturing perspective, this list, okay? This is what they came up with, the 7 waste, right? And then the 8th one was added at the end of it, right? And the inventory. And we're talking about waiting. We're talking about motion and transportation, rework, overprocessing. Each one of these things, trust me, we do it in the engineering organization. I'm not talking only about the testing, I'm talking about the development plus testing together as an organization, right? So day in, day out, we try to do process improvement, right? The last one, I don't want to just leave it, wasted potential of people. This is a very critical thing, right? So in the morning, like I just did here, like I just came in and I was just hearing that like people are talking about the processes versus innovation. Trust me, I run an organization which is a testing group, and I hold the maximum number of innovative disclosures that gets generated in Bangalore. I'm very proud about that. How does it work? Those are all the innovation disclosures that we come up with in terms of how we can do the process better or how we can make the user experience better. Who else is better than writing those innovation disclosures other than the guy who is representing the customer and I am the customer advocate? Right? So if I don't do some of these reduce of waste, what you are doing is you are going to make your people do some of the jobs that they should not be doing doing as part of the job. Right? So I will honestly request, if you are not already doing it, please do a complete, some of you might be handling a larger picture than me because you may be a process expert or a process consultant. Right? So, or like you might be owning a much larger like development plus test organization. My sincere request will be just try to deploy some people just to go and do the study, right? Not from a classroom perspective, be there with the people who are doing the job and kind of draw a process diagram how exactly one unit of work in your organization is getting produced. That will throw a whole lot of knowledge to you what is happening in the organization. That's what precisely I did in the testing part of it, like which I'll just be presenting it, right? I'm just talking about validation because it's very close to my heart and I'm very fluent with it, like in the 18 years of industry experience, 16 years I spent with this group. Right? So I'm very comfortable in talking about it or answering any questions or giving some examples. That's why I just picked it up rather than going for the full picture of, hey, in a product environment, this is how you reduce waste. Right? If you realistically take test environments at a time, I mean, like, this is pretty close to you are talking about the virtualization part of it, right? So this is like test environments at a time. Very important thing one point I want to make before I get into this list. When we are doing the process improvement, one biggest mistake, at least I have done in the past, I improve the processes which are the valid business drivers, which is giving me value back. I keep on improving those part of it. But there is something called non-business value part, which is the base that I'm calling out over here. I never bothered about improving those areas because that was not there in my core thing itself. For example, if you take testing, I used to go ahead and tell, hey, pull together the ultimate configuration that we need to test it for. I don't want to test it on all the configurations. So we went to the factory, we went to the customer, we just talked about the golden configurations, we just brought it out and we just put only those configurations to test. We will not test it on all the configurations. Amazing work. Okay, perfect, right? Like now my boss is looking at me and going like, hey Kali, did you reduce your cycle time? I'm looking at him going like, no, I've improved the process. My performance will be read pretty good. Kali has improved the processes in testing and he should be rewarded. And Kali got rewarded, that's perfectly fine. But did it give any business value back to the organization? Yes, we reduced the number of configurations, but actually the waste that was going on was on the test setup time. Right? I'm not talking about test setup time in a very simple application world. Right? When I'm talking about a Dell, which is close to where I work, I have configuration setup time. That means like I need to go to my hardware library. I need to check out the parts, and I need to kind of like pull it together. And I just put the operating system on top of that, and I need to put all the drivers and firmwares on top of that, and my setup is up and running. This process was taking significant chunk of time. The engineers were doing that, right? And the lead engineers are responsible for planning. And we are fine-tuning the planning, we are fine-tuning all the other aspect of it, but not the actual work. So I think like that's what the case study like that I went through, hey, the person who's the best person to do the process improvement is the person on the floor, right? Who is doing the job, right? So this came up when we did the study that like, okay, exactly where the time is going, we found that this was one of the long poles. Actually, the engineer is walking down, he's going, collecting the parts, coming back to the lab, putting it together. The part is not working. I'm just talking about some practical difficulties, okay? You can always tell that, okay, hey Kali, you need to have an inventory that is like lavish, like where you just go ahead, check out the right box. Practically not possible, right? So there are practical difficulties where this guy checks out the box and he just puts the configuration in place and it's not working. He's again going back, check out the thing. And actually in the processes it's talking about like when we do the planning, I just talk about 30 minutes of setup time. This was what is done in the test case library. It talks about a test setup time, 30 minutes. Ideally, it was running into hours, and then we tell them like, hey, that is, we draw a beautiful like kind of a statistical chart and tell those are all outliers. That's a fantastic way of brushing off anything that I don't do, right? It's an outlier. Like, don't talk about the exception cases. Like, let's talk about a typical case. Very easy for me to brush it off, right? So, but what we did over here was the test environment was completely like the operating system installation was made completely unattended, and we just went ahead with virtualization where feasible. We went ahead with ghost images where feasible, right? So and actually, like you will be very surprised when I went out and talked to the engineers. They were pretty innovative. Some of them, we did not give them the tools and things, but they were doing something very innovative. So mine is a hardware-based company. Like, so like there's a hard disk that you're attaching to the enclosure. So where your operating system is there, where all your firmware and drivers are there. So this guy just pulls that hard disk and just stacks it in his rack. And he goes on and checks the next hard disk and puts it for the next testing. So when the defect comes back for verification, he just pulls this hard disk out and just checks it in. Suddenly we were getting depleted out of hard disk from the hardware library. It was all in the racks of people in their cubes. Then we went ahead and asked like, hey, what's going on? Actually, we found out that they are just doing the automation through that. But there are much better options that are available. So we went ahead and reduced this. This gave us a big chunk back to us. Right? And the second one is like waiting for build verification to complete. This should be very close to heart for any test engineer in this room. Right? Or when will the build will come? Monday morning. When will the test will start? Monday morning. Amazing, right? Sounds too good to true. Actually, what happens? Monday morning, the build will come. So no offenses to the development counterparts, right? That is when like we just pull the build and we start doing the build verification test, right? Once I do the build verification test, it might be like around 12 o'clock, right? It's like so like so I just a couple of my coffees and then I just went for lunch and I came back and I just suddenly looked at it and told that like one light bulb went on telling that hey, that feature is completely broken, I cannot do it. All right, that's a half a day of effort is gone. Not only half a day of effort is gone, there's a whole testing team is waiting. Okay, you can always argue with me, Kali, you are not running a good organization. You should have put the old build and people should have continued with the testing. I'm just being practical and honest here, guys. There was a whole team waiting, telling that like the build is coming because I've got a lot of fixes that are coming in. Okay, like this is how we talk, right? Hey, there's a lot of fixes coming in. Let's not continue that old build testing. It doesn't yield anything. And even my development counterpart tells me that like, hey, don't find anything in the old build. I'll not fix it because I don't need a new build. I'll just reject those defects. If you find okay, like all put together, there is quite a good amount of chunk of my engineers sitting there doing nothing or writing some test cases like just so that like I can defend myself. My team is not idle. They are writing something, but is it helping the customer? Right? So this one, I'll just talk about it a bit because like the build verification test really helped us, right? So we just went for a zero-touch build verification test. I'm sure like many of the product companies has it. I'm not talking about something like that unique and rocket science over here. But if your organization doesn't have one, this is one area which yields benefit immediately. Removes your engineers from the mundane build verification task which nobody likes. At least my engineers hate it. Kali, every time you get the build, I'll put the same 2 configurations, I'll write the same 5 test cases, I'll run it and I'll send a beautiful pass or fail mail. Who likes it? I'm an engineer. Nobody likes this work. Trust me, today we have a system in place. When the build is complete, automatically the testing build verification test kicks off. Right? Completely unattended over the night. It just shoots out a mail telling that like what is the pass percentage and the fail percentage, which configurations it's failing, which configurations it's passing. We have not, some of the companies I have seen where my friends are working, it also goes on and tells whether the build is like healthy enough for a test or not. We do have a manual intervention over there, like where we just go and just look at the results in the morning. But trust me, like we have put like all the big bosses in the mail, okay? It is one way of telling, Kali telling that like, hey, I am doing process improvement. I have put all my bosses in the mail, right? What is the problem? The moment this comes out, like if there's a 95% pass rate somewhere, the boss just sits back. Like it puts in a very different connotation to the whole thing, right? So today, the whole organization knows how many builds are failing. I never publish data on build failure rate. Actually, a lot of times, the development directors are directly asking their people, hey, I did see a mail in the morning, like it was completely it was failing. Was it a product problem or was it what problem? So now I have just translated my whole role into a very different thing. Now I have got a different time to go and do. This is I'm just not telling that when I'm eliminating waste, I'm just going to reduce the cycle time, I'm reducing people and giving it back to the organization. That is not my intention. I want my engineers to go and do something cool stuff where they can more value add as an engineer rather than doing this work, right? So knowledge wrap-up time. This was a fantastic thing that happened in one of the groups that I have handled in the past, right? Is that like we had a pool of engineers. We felt that like okay, hey, we will be able to like deploy anybody anywhere, right? So we'll just form a team in the starting. We'll tell them that like hey, this is the product, this is the test cases, go and run that. We just think that like it is, unless or otherwise, you do some of the basics just like what Amin talked about. Don't try commoditization before you are ready for it. It requires a whole lot of basic ingredients that needs to be there, because like what we do is that like the easiest piece that we can attack is that, hey, if you have a generic pool of engineers, if you can deploy them, they can execute the test cases, then it will be very great. What happens? Everybody is learning the product, the defect reject rate really went up. right? So kind of like this comes from like it is. You need to do a trade-off. What kind of roles that you are going to give to a generic pool? What kind of roles that you are going to have as subject matter experts? You need to just do that homework, right? Low-risk test planning. So this is what I talked about, the complete coverage, right? Actually, like, so my leads will be like pretty happy to do that, right? Actually, so when I go out and ask them how many configurations we need to test it on, they will just come up with like zillion configurations, right? So why? So then we need to really do a planning in terms of the customer-centric planning. This is where you need to feed in the data from the field, where the customer is using your product, in what environment he or she is using it, what is the most selling configuration, what is the most used configuration in the field, and then go ahead and do your planning, right? So and also introduce some risk, right? And this is very important when you're doing the test planning because you have a chunk called the regression testing. I have personally questioned people in my own team. There will be a defect that will be coming. That is a product that I released around 4.5 years back. Mostly all my customers have moved out, but I do have a support class for that, so I'm testing it. The defect will be coming today, and the developer will be running around trying to fix that. I just look at it and go like what's going on here actually, right? Like, so no, Kali, like every other defect was like, I just tried everywhere, no other defect was coming, I just went and get this, it fell down. So you need to have a very decisional call when you're doing this, right? So low risk planning, right? Like so, for me, it is not an engineer's mistake. Who gave that non-automated regression configuration to the engineer rather than giving a new configuration where he or she can add value to the customer? There is a resource sitting there doing something which is not useful for the customer. That's how I look at it as. Right? So coming back to the ad hoc testing and regression validation, this is again, I was just giving the example from the test planning, it just normally flows down to that. Ad hoc testing is a pretty good thing for the engineers, cool stuff. I'm doing value add, but where do you value add? How do you value add? There needs to be a very channelized effort of this. Otherwise, there's going to be a whole lot of effort that's going to go waste, right? Varied automation development tools. Okay, this is a very close to heart concept for me. I just used to tell this as a joke, okay? When I join a new company, I always tell this, how many test managers changed, I can easily find out. Do you know how? Number of tools in the shelf. Just go there, just look at the number of tools in the shelf, it will tell you the history of how many managers came and went. So I will go, I'll tell Segway is the best, and then another person will come and tell Rational is the best. So it's not because of like purposefully, because everyone is comfortable with something, and everyone has a reason to find out that like, okay, hey, this is kind of for this release, this tool is finding the maximum number of objects. Actually, I'm tired of this reasoning, like behind, like when people apply to me for like approval for tools, Kali, like the previous tool that we bought did not like recognize all the objects. This one is recognizing 30%, but now people have become very business oriented with me, right? So 30% more objects than it was doing it. So please approve the cost. Right, like so nowadays, like we have put a tools group in place, which is like kind of looking at it and telling that like, okay, hey, give me the business case, let us go through it and let us understand it and let's put it in place, right? So this must be across the board, but this is one area but this is like, what I'm giving example is a very lighter vein example, but this has got a very deeper implication in terms of how are you going to train your people. I can change the tool. Number one, I need to redo all the scripting, okay. Everybody tells that like all the 4G scripts across all the things, but you need to do some re-provisioning. And second is that how you want to kind of like enable all your team members, especially if it is going from one CLI tool to another CLI tool, you're going to have certain things to change. Okay, I've pretty much talked through this, like nothing new will be here, but I just want to make sure that like I just leave you with certain thoughts. Tools usage for OS and environment installation, non-technical resources for hardware setup. This is one thing I did not touch up when I was talking through this. I had just gone ahead and put a technician in place in the organization whose job is to just to go ahead and check out the hardware and come, do the basic sanity and tell that the hardware is working fine. This is doing wonders. Trust me, engineers are feeling much better, right? So they have time to go and do something else, right? And then build verification, I talked about it. Knowledge ramp-up time, I talked about it. Low-risk test planning, please use the risk-based analysis. Introduce certain risk, that's okay. There is either way, you are not going to do 100% testing. But it should be, you should know and you should tell your management what is a risk that you have introduced based on what you have avoided and how you have done the planning. It should be very transparent. It's not an arbit risk taking, it's a calculated risk taking, right? And ad hoc testing and regression validation, I talked about it. Varied automation and development tools, I talked about it. That's pretty much I had, right? So I just want to make sure that, just want to leave you with a thought, just go ahead, understand exactly one work unit is getting produced in your organization, just see where and all you will be able to reduce the waste and put a process in place that will reduce it. This is what I did. It may not be directly applicable to every one of you, but if you can follow the concept, surely you'll be able to find some other areas that is happening and you'll be able to improve it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, Kali, for your focus on reducing waste, which is critical for all of us. I think this is the right point of time for us to look beyond waste into the productivity itself that would increase the output. So I would invite Naresh to focus on productivity.
Good afternoon.
Just a second, 1 minute. Just to remind you to jot down your questions and pass on to the coordinators so that we can take select questions and answer them, leaving this for discussions over tea.
Good afternoon. With my colleague Saman, setting the stage, and Kali very passionately talking about his experiences in testing, I think I have a pretty much easy job ahead of me the next 10 minutes. So I want to leave you with a couple of my thoughts, and the first one is around productivity. I don't know if my colleague Ashoka is here, and a couple of years back I was speaking at one of the similar events, and where I touched upon this whole idea of productivity, what are the elements of productivity, and I went back and started pestering Ashoka, who used to head metrics that time, saying, is there a way we can come out with an equation? Obviously he brushed it aside, saying, it's a lunch discussion and forget about it. And after a couple of days, Ashoka actually came out with an equation which I am using it here. And this is the equation, obviously not a mathematical equation to be